Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Society of American Military Engineers, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Developing Compliant Proposals for Government RFPs. I'm Tim Fitzpatrick, Business Development Manager for SGS Access Analytical Services, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I also serve as Vice Chair of Education and Training for the SAMI Environmental Committee, who is sponsoring today's webinar. The mission of the Environmental Committee is to enhance professionalism, create value for its membership, and provide professional development and a networking forum. The Environmental Committee seeks to achieve this mission through several avenues, including guest speakers on relevant topics during webinars, supporting conferences that promote environmental awareness and committee objectives, and special membership meetings at the annual SAMI Joint Engineer Training Conference and Expo. We have planned this webinar in an effort to engage and educate industry and government members of SAMI. We hope that you will find the information presented useful to your business. Following the webinar, the presentations will be emailed to all attendees within 3 business days. Watch out for a follow-up email containing the presentation, PDH certificate, and a link to a recording of this webinar. This webinar would not be possible without our presenters volunteering their time and efforts, so I'd like to sincerely thank all of them for their participation today. I'd also like to thank Rick Cox, Chair of the Environmental Committee, for his efforts in organizing today's webinar, as well as thanks to all of you for your attendance and continued support of SAMI. The format for today's webinar will consist of 4 separate sessions. Red Team Consulting will lead off with a discussion and overview of the capture process for 15 minutes. That will be followed by Nav Facts Southwest's presentation in its entirety, discussing their acquisition process and perspective on proposals, including do's and don'ts, and other feedback from years of reviewing and evaluating proposals from industry. Their discussion will take approximately 20 minutes. Red Team will then wrap up the discussion with approximately 15 minutes dedicated to discussion of proposal development, compliance guidelines, their proposal do's and don'ts, and other tips from the industry perspective. That will be followed by a Q&A session of up to 30 minutes, as we do anticipate an active Q&A session for this topic. Please note that our panelists cannot address any specific questions related to any specific RFPs in this forum. During the presentation, I encourage each of you to send in your questions as they arise. You can type questions in the WebEx Q&A chat box and then click on Submit to All Panelists, as Nicole mentioned. We'll answer as many questions as time allows during the Q&A session at the end. After this webinar, you will be automatically routed to a survey page. Please participate in this short poll so we can address any concerns and learn of your interest for future webinars. I'd now like to introduce our first speakers from Red Team. Jeffrey Shen will lead off, and he is Vice President and General Manager at Red Team Consulting, bringing over 20 years of proven leadership and expertise in federal contracting, corporate strategy, and business development. He's delivered business strategy, capture management, and acquisition planning to the U.S. federal government and Fortune 500 companies worldwide. He regularly works with senior government executives and acquisition officials and has been a featured speaker at various summits and conferences in the past on topics such as acquisition strategies, proposal and capture management, and business development. Eric Spillman is Director of Business Development for Red Team Consulting with over 25 years of federal government, private industry, and consulting business experience. He worked for the DoD for over 13 years, specializing in environmental, facilities, and infrastructure programs. His work in the private sector includes leading client delivery teams, startup and growth of new operations and offices, and business development. Mr. Spillman has led the capture proposal and pricing process to win federal contracts ranging in size from 70K TORFPs up to $3 billion IDIQs. Over the last 5 years, Mr. Spillman has run his own consulting business and provided his small business clients with strategic business development, marketing and branding, and proposal management and pricing services. Mr. Spillman holds a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Maryland and is a current member of SAMI. And without further ado, I'll now pass the call over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, Tim. This is Jeff Shen with Red Team Consulting. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time this afternoon to hear both us and NAVFAC talk about proposal development and government evaluations. Now, I won't, I'm going to the next slide, hopefully it goes through. I won't spend much on this, but just a little bit about us to give you a little bit of context of why we're here in this presentation. Essentially what Red Team Consulting does is we help other companies win government contracts. Proposal, capture, pricing is what we do for a living. We work with all different types of companies, both big and small, probably close to 200 companies a year in all different sorts of industries. We see lots of different government RFPs across most, if not all, federal agencies through the course of our company. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is really based upon that experience of working with different companies and working with different federal agencies. I won't bore you with our backgrounds since Tim did such an eloquent job of introducing us. All of you will have this as a takeaway, I believe, who are on the call as well. This is Eric's bio right there as well. So here's the red team agenda. As Tim had discussed, we're going to spend the first 15 minutes really going through the capture process overview before Nav Facts gives their entire presentation, and then Eric here will wrap up with the proposal development strategies. We are going to do something unprecedented in the case that for the capture process, which normally takes at least a day to talk about, I'm going to do in 15 minutes. So either you will learn a lot or nothing at all because I ran through it so quickly. I'm kidding. Hopefully, if as I go through this, you'll all have good questions to ask, which we can always answer during the Q&A period. So this is a capture continuum. This is a kind of a standard capture life cycle that a lot of companies go through. And I'm going to be going through a few of these steps, not all of them. Just the one takeaway I want to point out in this particular capture continuum is the fact that companies, when they go through capture, don't need to follow this process in a linear fashion. What I mean by that is, as you go through this and you say you conduct a competitive analysis and you determine that you are not in as good of a position as your competitors, you can always go back to your go-no-go decision criteria and decide to no bid. And so these are just the critical steps that you would typically follow in a capture process. Now, when we talk about capture, we're talking about the strategy and the process and the steps that you follow the moment the opportunity has been identified. There's a lot of confusion around capture in itself. Some mix it with BD, some mix it with proposal, but just look at it in terms of the strategy of what it takes to win a federal contract. So I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit of detail. First is research and influence the opportunity. Now, when I talk about qualifying opportunities, what I mean by that is I ask companies to qualify the opportunity independent of your ability to win it. So it's a matter of really asking yourself, is this a real deal? Is this something that will actually materialize and result in something for us as a company? So I ask companies to look at the 3 V's, which I've underlined. The first V is validity. Is it valid? Is it real? What I mean by that, is it going to go away? Will budgets be cut? Will this eventually be canceled for any reason? That obviously requires a lot of due diligence on your part in researching the opportunity. Viability means, will the government actually use the contract? This question becomes important, especially as companies look at IDIQs, multi-award IDIQs, where there might be a limited award profile. Are agencies actually going to use this contract post-award? And then value. Value is, what does it mean to me? Just because contracts are awarded at a certain dollar value or volume, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get that dollar amount. So what is the value for you as a company? I'm going to move ahead in terms of really what I feel is the most important step in starting the capture process. It's trying to identify the customer's challenges and goals. Whenever you go after a contract, the question you have to ask yourself is, what is the customer trying to achieve? What are their hot buttons? What are their pain points? What are their objectives and goals? And a lot of companies kind of toss this around somewhat generically, and it's so important for companies to understand that. Because as you go through the capture process and then you transition into the proposal process, answering that question will really allow you to customize how you develop your overall capture proposal. It's akin to you just saying, well, I'm going to propose XYZ because that's what we do. And if you do that, you're really skipping the step of what the customer is trying to achieve. So that first step, documenting those customer challenges will help guide your overall capture. And quite frankly, if for those of you in business development or proposal development, if you're going after an opportunity, you can't answer that, I would question, does it make sense to even go after that opportunity? Because I guarantee you there are your competitors who have taken the time to understand that and document that, who are in a much better position to respond versus a company who might not have documented those challenges. The next step is to research the opportunity. Now, this might seem straightforward in terms of, well, sure, we want to understand the customer, we want to understand the opportunity to get some background. While that's important, the reason why I put this particular step in here is because you can't necessarily influence how an opportunity should be developed or how you might want to shape the opportunity until you fully understand the context of the opportunity itself. So I've provided here some sample questions that you may want to ask yourself, and questions that you might eventually want to ask the customer, in order to best influence. And once you do that first step of researching the opportunity, that will allow you then to properly influence. Now, I'm not going to read all these bullets, but what I'm going to do is explain the whole process of call planning. When we work with not only companies, but when we have communication with our friends in government, the number one thing that challenges them, at least from what we understand, is that typically within 6 months of a final RFP, you have tons and tons of companies trying to call the government, trying to influence it, try to shape it, try to get in front. We want to have dialogue. But the piece of advice I would give to all of those who are listening now is that if you are trying to contact the government within 6 months of the final RFP, you are already way too late. You are already way behind. You really need to look at this element of capture, in particular this influencing part of the opportunity, perhaps even a year out. When our friends in NAVFAC go through their acquisition lifecycle, and I know they have a couple slides on the acquisition lifecycle, you need to look early stage in terms of when they're just starting to think about the recompete. That's when you have a better opportunity to get in front of the government to hopefully have some discussion, some dialogue. When they've gotten to the RFI stage, past the RFI and the draft RFP, you're too late. Your ability to influence the opportunity is minimized. So that's the one piece of advice I'd give out there. And when we say it takes 12 to 24 months to really properly plan your capture, a lot of it comes down to that time frame of getting in front of the government as quickly or as early as you can. So I'm going to move ahead to the go-no-go, or really bid-no-bid decision criteria. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I do only have one slide on it, and so what I'll say is this. We've worked with some of the biggest integrators in the market. We've worked with companies that have less than 50 people. And everybody has their own unique way of doing a bid-no-bid analysis. The number one thing that we've learned from companies who have a bid-no-bid process is what? That companies never follow it. It's like the craziest thing that we never understand, that companies have a 10, 50, 100-step process, gate reviews, gate checks, and for whatever reason, it just all goes out the door the moment this beautiful opportunity materializes and they say, we got to go after it. So although we do a lot of training on developing a bid-no-bid process and how to make it, how to be more diligent, how to follow it, I've kind of taken a shortcut approach here. And it's more of what I call the realistic gut check bid analysis. And this is really what you see in front of you in terms of some of the bullets. And some of these might feed into your bid-no-bid process, but I feel like you should be able to answer most, if not all, of these questions in order to have a thumbs up, hey, we should go after this opportunity. Obviously, got to meet all the RFP's requirements, not just from the technical, but also if there's certification requirements, if there's particular instructions that the government has laid out, you have to follow those. Does it fit within our strategic plan? This is the thing that we recommend for all companies to do, is to have that strategic plan. Hopefully in Q4 calendar year, you've gotten your senior executives in a room and you're deciding this is what we need to do to grow. These are the agencies we need to focus within. And so when you go and come across these opportunities, you can ask yourself, does it fit within the plan that we had previously established? Do we know details outside of what is publicly posted? So this comes along the lines of how well in advance did we plan our capture? Do we already have the customer's ear? Do we know something that no one else knows? Because if we do, it might put us in a better position. Really, what I think is an important element here is, do we have the secret sauce? If it's an O&M contract, if we know through our research that the government really cares about the people who are working on site, have we spoken to the key personnel? Have we gotten signed letters of commitment? Do we have that secret sauce? And finally, the last step is, do the customers know us and like us? And that kind of speaks to the research and influence side that I'd spoken to earlier. So if you can answer these questions, I feel like companies are just going to be in a much better position to make smart decisions on which opportunities to pursue. Conducting a competitive analysis. And so what we do is we recommend companies conduct a competitive analysis really for opportunities that are single award or may have a limited award profile or ones that are really strategic for your company. We don't necessarily recommend doing a competitive analysis on opportunities that are multi-award, where like a GSA Oasis, you're going to have 100+ winners. Those don't make as much sense to do a deep dive, because really what you're trying to do when you do a competitive analysis is to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are relative to the competition. And it does boil down to the proposal itself, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So when looking at the competitive analysis, the first step that we advise companies to look at is what are the outputs? One of the biggest challenges that companies have when they do a competitive analysis is they go through this exercise where they identify 3, 4, 5 companies, and they just say, here are the strengths and here are the weaknesses for the companies, and they shelf it. They just literally put it on the table, and they do nothing with it. And that's frustrating for a company like ours, because we want actual outputs. We want there to be action items that you can follow through with as a result of the competitive analysis. So here are a few things that we would look for. For example, if we do a competitive analysis and we recognize that your competitors have more prime past performance, and the current draft RFP states that they're looking for 3 prime past performance, well, one of the outputs is, could we submit a question or try to influence the government to request 1 prime past performance instead of 3 prime? Same thing could be said for certifications, awards, key personnel, certain number of years of experience for your key personnel. But those are the types of things that we need to ask ourselves on the outset of doing a competitive analysis. Really what you're looking for is, what are those action items that we should follow through with as a result? Now, how to actually conduct one, I do have a takeaway slide here that I won't go through in detail. Hang on, let me see. I apologize.
No, try that.
Let's see. There we go. So here are the steps that we've outlined for competitive analysis. And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but really kind of outline step by step what you want to follow through with from a competitive analysis perspective. The one key takeaway I'll throw here is, when you do one, you want to narrow down the competition to come up with 2 or 3 competitors. And when you do the SWOT analysis on the competitors, you're really doing the SWOT against the evaluation criteria, seeing where companies might have significant strengths or discriminators that might beat you, meaning they might get a significant strength versus you as it pertains to evaluation criteria. And then as you go through that, you're trying to come up with the overall, what you see as a quote-unquote black hat. If for those of you unfamiliar with the term, black hat is how the competitor might actually bid given all the analysis. And really that's what you're trying to get to when you do the competitive analysis. The last step of the capture continuum I'm going to talk about is developing a sound strategy. Almost immediately, as soon as you identify the customer's challenges, their pain points, their hot buttons, really what the government is looking to achieve and when they're competing a contract, almost shortly thereafter, you need to start documenting what your overall win strategy. It's almost the why us. Now, when you document the why us, as difficult as it might sound, you almost have to remove the us part out of the why us. Yes, you might document that we have the capabilities, we have the experience, we have the right people, but you have to, again, look at it from the customer's perspective. What are they trying to achieve? And then what do you bring to the table that helps them to not only achieve, but perhaps exceed what it is they're looking for? That win strategy will serve as the baseline for your overall capture. It will also serve as the baseline for your teaming. And we don't have a slide on teaming, so that's the one thing I will draw a parallel to, is that when you're trying to convince teaming partners to join your overall team, your win strategy should serve as the basis for your teaming message. So this is a critical element of the overall capture that we want to make sure that companies follow. Wind themes, as you get further into the capture, and this can also be a proposal step, the one quick takeaway on the wind themes, we've seen hundreds of wind themes. Many of them are not great. I would tell you how to make them great is that you need to get to the level of where you're describing your features, benefits, discriminators, and I say proof statements, they're really examples of past performance, but apply those to each evaluation factor and sub-factor level. So if you see evaluation factors such as corporate experience, staffing, key personnel, management approach, you need to have win themes for each of those particular factors and sub-factors, and you need to think like the customer. It has to be detailed enough for them to give you a strength or a significant strength. So you need to spell out the benefits. You have to say why you're the only company that can do it and why you've done it before. And showing that example can equate to reduced risk. And then last but not least, on the my portion of the presentation, always consider different risks as you are planning out your capture. And we've highlighted a few examples of risks that you need to account for. These could be technical risks in the performance of the contract. These could be schedule risks in terms of can you perform within the timeline, cost risks, but there's so many different risks that you need to account for. There might be budgetary risks from the customer, but outline those early on the capture process, and that will help you account for it as you plan out your overall capture and proposal. So with that, we will turn it over to our friends in NAVFAC to have them go through their portion of the presentation.
All right. Let me get the ball to NAVFAC.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. And before NAVFAC comes up, I'll do quick introductions for our speakers. Ed Chevalier is the Director of Environmental Contracts for Nav Facts Southwest in San Diego, California. Ed's been with the Navy for 29 years, the first 5 on active duty as Supply Corps officer with the remainder almost exclusively with Nav Facts Southwest as a civil servant. He oversees approximately 30 contract specialists throughout Nav Facts Southwest in support of the NAVFAC Environmental Business Lines mission. Ed leads his teams in the administration of $825 million worth of contracts with 42 different prime contractors, and is overseeing 8 new procurements of different multiple and single award contracts totaling $754 million, as well as standalone contract task orders and cooperative agreements worth approximately $150 million in FY17. Ed is currently serving as the source selection authority on most all large procurements related to EVBL, and is involved in every new procurement other than task orders. He has served as contracting officer, source selection evaluation board chair, source selection advisory council chair, source selection authority, and due to his experience, is considered an expert in proposal review and source selection process. Our second speaker, Melanie, is the lead environmental engineer for the Environmental Corps Technical Restoration Department in San Diego. She's been at NAVFAC Southwest for 17 years. She provides environmental technical support to both active and closed Navy and Marine Corps bases for issues related to CERCLA, RCRA, radiological, acquisition, and emerging contaminants. She coordinates with the other Naval Facilities Engineering Commands and work groups nationwide to ensure consistency throughout the Navy program. Melanie works as the lead technical evaluator on several large basic NAVFAC restoration contracts. She has been evaluating proposals for approximately 10 years and works closely with the acquisition teams and NAVFAC HQ to optimize the environmental contracting process. And finally, Allison Cantu is a contracting officer representative for NAVFAC Southwest Environmental Corps. She has been with the Navy for 13 years, both at NAVFAC Southwest in Washington, primarily serving as a remedial project manager for multiple bases throughout the U.S., managing installation restoration and munitions response program, as well as range sustainment projects. In addition, Allison serves on technical evaluation boards for large contract procurements for the environmental business line and provides environmental cost estimates. She's also a member of the Emissions Response Work Group and provides munitions assistance. She serves as an instructor for the NAVFAC Southwest Environmental Engineering Professional Engineering Review course, focusing on thermodynamics, gases and ventilation, and combustion. I'll now turn the presentation over to Ed. Thank you very much.
Well, Tim, thank you so much. This is a wonderful opportunity to engage with industry. We're trying to move forward with other opportunities like this, including industry days for our individual RFPs, our different projects. But this kind of scenario or setting is something that we want to be more a part of, because I think that whatever we can impart will benefit you, which then in turn benefits us. So what I'd like to do is go fairly quickly, since I want to, I think the biggest benefit is going to be in the Q&A session. So we're going to try and go through this quick. For those participants or those that are on the line here, the attendees, please make sure you send in your questions, and we can be able to have a robust discussion towards the end. So let's start with the objectives here. So, you know, it's a quick rundown of the bureaucracy of the process. All right. So, you know, we're gonna try and give you a little bit of an idea what it's like behind the curtain here. Okay. So, what we're going to focus on mostly is large, basic contracts that we award. But you know, a lot of this stuff is also applicable at that task order level. So we have individual teams, at least at NAVFAC Southwest, and other FACs are you know, built the same way, where you have one team that awards the large contracts, but then you have other field office teams that award the task orders off of those. And so a lot of this pertains to that as well. I want to talk a little bit about the people behind the evaluation and why that matters. We're going to give you a little bit of our insight. It's not magic. It's fairly straightforward. And I think Melanie will also share some anecdotals as well. So next slide, please. Okay. The objectives are really, it's all about competition. Okay. What we're looking for is really, you know, the holy trinity of a decent price, you know, not rock bottom. We want you to meet or exceed your delivery date, right? Because you'll never get penalized with finishing early, right? We also are not looking, you know, we look good and you look good, but if you lowball to get the job and then modding it out to increase the price and the period of performance, that's not good. It has to be a great job at the end of the day. We don't have time or the capacity to figure out how to stick it to our contractors, even if we thought it made sense, right? We react to you. We know the regs, you know the regs. In fact, you should be experts at it, almost better than us, okay? So we want to be fair to you. And of course, we want to avoid protests. A lot of the times we've got these big documents, and I'll kind of go through our plan of action milestones in a minute. But we're trying to make sure that we deliver a contract to our business lines so they can you know, execute their mission without hiccups. One of the biggest hiccups is protest. If we get a protest, we both failed. All right? We spend an inordinate amount of time to make sure that we pretty much always win. There are times when we don't, you know, there's times where perhaps you take advantage of something ambiguous and we didn't clean it up, or we just simply missed something in our evaluation, and that happens. But contrary to belief, even if we could, we can't favor who we like. All right, so we're very structured in our evaluation process, and there's a lot of checks and balances as we go through it. Next slide. Okay, so kind of in order, you have laws, you have the FAR, which implements the law, and it's considered basically the law. You have at least where NAVFAC is, you go down the line, you have the supplement to the FAR, which is done by the Department of Defense. And so they put some more parameters that we have to follow. Then you have the Navy. The Navy has to put a spin on the DOD, who puts a spin on the government. And then, of course, NAVFAC. NAVFAC has to put a spin on the Navy spin, on the DOD spin, which is the spin off of the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And then what NAVFAC has done, which is unlike other systems commands within the Navy, is that it has a kind of a process that our contract specialists are basically all of our employees use, going through the steps particularly in this case, the acquisition process. So they kind of go in order, and you can't have anything in, say, the acquisition standards for NAVFAC that contradicts anything north of it. And, you know, because of all this, that's why contract specialists exists, right? We exist to help our, you know, technical folks navigate the regs and come up with good, sound business decisions. Okay, so I'm not going to go into details on this. We just want to roll through the process kind of real quick in the next several slides. But what's been boiled down to about a dozen or so steps that you'll see here is actually from about 80 separate tasks it takes for the source selection team to go from the beginning, which is the receipt of the requirement, promise to pay, and government estimate, all the way through to conducting debriefs. So about 80 different steps. The CS takes the lead with doing this. They're responsible for it with the supervision of their contracting officer. Okay, so on the front end of it, and by the way, this is all these steps are required, right? So we all have to do these. And so what we've done is we've tried to make sure that we be as efficient as possible as we go through these POAMs, right? But it's still, no matter what we do, there's still so many steps. There's so many ways that we can get sideways on some of this stuff that it's very hard to say it will take a year to get done or it'll take 18 months to get done. It's just too hard to be able to do that until you get past particularly the squishy front end, which I call it. So when we're going through the market research, we do sources sought, and we're starting to develop our AP, or acquisition plan, source selection plan, and RFP, which is usually done kind of at the same time. This is where we're trying to form what our real requirement is. Back to, I think, Eric's point before, with respect to, you know, where do you try and insert yourself into talking to us and understanding what's coming up as far as reprocurements and so forth. You know, that's a good time where you want to be involved in SAME meetings and other things that where you get to have a voice. And so this is the one where we have a lot. This is where we're told, hey, how long will it take to award something? And we really don't have much say as to how long it's going to take to create that solid requirement. If it's simply a straight-up reprocurement, that's great. But if it's not, if it's something really different and off the wall, like I think we had our MARAC Industry Day yesterday, there's a lot of moving parts to that. So anyway, where we lose time or it's hard for us is the very front end. Okay, so as we're going through, we'll just kind of go through this. But before we go, right around in here between the market research and you know, in that pre-solicitation action, what we do at NAVFAC Southwest is we default to having industry days. It's not a bullet here, but it's something that's super important because what it does, it also gives you a chance to have a voice and help influence how our contract will be you know, put together, as well as the evaluation factors. For instance, yesterday at MARAC, we talked during that industry day. We went through and said, hey, this is how we're going to choose you. What do you think? And we got a lot of excellent feedback. We also asked, okay, so this is a cost contract. We said, all right, so what are we doing? What are we doing with our PMO? And so we had a lot of excellent feedback. It was over half an hour talking about how we should do that. So it was just a great idea to have those industry days. And I suggest that if you work with any other agency, that you know, request, hey, can we at the front end participate in an industry day and get an understanding as to how we're going to be chosen, and you know, how can we influence and shape the requirement. So moving forward, let's go. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, evaluate proposals. So not going to touch on everything here, but there's just a lot of steps We have to go through them in order, and I'll talk a little bit about the evaluation process in a sec. Go to the next one. Very top bullet on this slide here, discussions. We always have a caveat in our RFPs, or we should, where it says we intend to award without discussions, right? But that doesn't mean we have to, right? So we only go to discussions if we just don't have a great solution. And so, because we know that discussions will basically make folks healthier in their competitiveness going forward in the subsequent rounds of discussions, but at the same time, also creates just a tremendous amount of work for us to go through a lot of legal reviews to make sure our notices are there and correct, and then, you know, again, it adds months to the process. So we really want, and I think Melanie will touch on this in a bit, is we need you to make sure that your proposals are, I don't say perfect, but close to perfect as possible, and touching on all the stuff that I think Eric mentioned as far as being able to discriminate why you're better than the other guy within the factors that we provide. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Okay. I want you to understand that the source selection board is not a full-time job. Okay. It's a collateral duty. So Melanie, Allison, others, they have a tremendous amount of other workload. This is collateral, right? So we're not sitting and we're not super expert and we do all of them, you know, ourselves. This is something that all of our seasoned professional, technical, and contract specialists do as part of their main job. So put yourselves in our shoes and just know that while you may have a board, you're going to be, you know, submitting for a particular project or a contract, know that the board members may not have sat on a board for a year. Melanie, would you say? Okay, so for quite a while. So to understand that, so you guys are professionals. You got companies like the ones here that are presenting their professionals that do this all the time. Well, just know that our board members are not like that. Okay, so they have to come together, focus on the requirement, and only go by what is in our source selection plan and the evaluation factors that are in the RFP. What do? They sit in a room sequestered, right? So it used to not be that way. And that used to delay a lot of our awards, which we kind of had a bit of a bad reputation over the last few years. We're changing that. So when your proposals come in, they all sit in a room. They're not allowed out. We'll slide food under the door to them, whatever. The thing is that they're supposed to sit in there and go through the process. They look at your proposals, they probably read it all through, and they can come up with any sort of process they'd like to review their proposals. Maybe Melanie can touch on this as well as Allison. But they'll go through proposal by proposal, and then they'll make sure that whatever strengths and weaknesses they assign to your proposal, that they're consistent across the board, because that's the important thing. It's not whether you've got so many strengths or got so many weaknesses, it's have we applied that logic to each of these proposals consistently, and from there outflows those that are highest rated on down. Okay, so after they do that, so they do this before they look at price. So once they've created their technical evaluation board, then they move in and we throw price into the factor. So pretty much all of our large procurements are best value trade-off, and so then we have to pull in. Okay, so now, is this worth it? And typically we use a seat project, or now we're moving towards cost modeling, but now we're looking towards, okay, is this realistic? Can they do the work for that low of a price? Is this unreasonable? Is it too high? And somewhere in the sweet spot, and where does the GE fall into this? So there's a lot of extra efforts. There's really two parts to it, technical evaluation, and then we go into the trade-off. Okay, next. Okay, so we're going to move into the different evaluation factors. Melanie, you can jump in if you'd like. These are some of the standard ones that we have here. Corporate experience. Safety is one that NAVFAC has to include for good reason. Past performance, we have to have past performance in there, and that's a huge factor that I'm not sure if Eric touched on that so much, but you need to pay attention to your past performance, what's in CPARs, and particularly with your PPQs as well. Commitments to socioeconomic programs, obviously, if it's set aside for large business, or if it's unrestricted. Key personnel, not my personal favorite on the large procurement because it's just a lot of extra work. And besides, we can tell you that you're going to meet the key personnel requirements in the contract and not have to evaluate it. So we'll still get the good people. You're going to have to give it to us, but we don't need to evaluate it up front. It's a 5-year contract. We can figure that out. With that, however, with the task order awards, this is where you may see the requirement to provide key personnel as an evaluation factor during task order. Financial systems is part of cost price, and then, of course, price and cost. Eric mentioned that there was a management approach type factor. We don't use that anymore. It's just a big term paper that you guys write for us, and we have to read, and we just don't see as much value there. So we don't worry about that. Not so much as corporate experience and past performance. Next. Okay. I hate to, go through this, but it has to be said. You must answer the mail. I mean, Melanie and Allison, you probably have experiences where they've just screwed up. Okay, and so it doesn't send a good message that you've got spelling errors, that you go beyond the page limitations, and so it just tells us a little something about your QA and your QC, excuse me. So make sure that it's a polished, finished product to come to us, and while it's not usually part of an evaluation factor per se, so we can't ding you on it officially. But it kind of raises the question about, hey, if this is an example of your deliverables, what are we going to expect in the future? I mean, this is your get in the door resume. So what are your deliverables going to look like? And in fact, I think in some of our evaluation factors, we do include verbiage that puts some weight into that. Okay, again, we do not want to have discussions. It's more work and more expense for both of us, right? It does narrow the difference down, making it hard to differentiate, meaning perhaps a greater chance you think it's worth the process, which equals perhaps more time spent making sure we don't lose, and of course it also equals a huge delay in awards. So we try and avoid discussions if we can. Okay. So another thing too is while you're figuring out why you're better than the other guys and trying to articulate that in your responses to us, do not be vague, right? Vague means we're taking on risk because you're not telling us. So you're asking us to make logical leaps. We don't want to do that. So be very explicit, particularly when you're, let's just say it's a technical approach to the C project. Don't allow us to guess because we have to assume risk when we're guessing. So don't allow us to guess, please. All right. And Melanie, why don't you talk for a little while?
Okay. Hi.
You could have talked while I was doing that.
Okay. Hi, this is Melanie Keto. I'm an environmental engineer for the Navy. So I'm just going to go over some of the things and kind of just go on the individual evaluation factors of how we look at it and some of the things that we see that are good and others that are bad. So the reason why this particular map is actually up is the last bullet that Ed was mentioning is if there's an actual contract that says that this is going to be the area that we're going to have majority of our work at, for us to be Southwest, which means it's California, Nevada, and Utah, New Mexico, then we're going to be looking at projects that's going to be more emphasis for us if you have more of the work responsibility in that area rather than somewhere else, such as inland. Next, please. So that goes straight into one of our tech evals is going to be corporate experience. Now, remember what the whole purpose of why we even have evaluation factors. We want to know if the offer actually has the experience that we want for the services needed. I mean, it's pretty logical, But think about it, right? So if there's if the evaluation factor actually says it has to be done within the past 5 years, it has to be 80% complete, make sure you pick projects that meet that. I know it seems simple, but there's so many times that they don't even meet those minimum requirements, and therefore they're disqualified. One of the questions we get is, what exactly does 80% complete mean? Does that mean by schedule? Does that mean by capacity? And if you're unsure, make sure that you write a request for more information and give it to the contract specialist and ask him or her that, because that's a good question. But make sure that you actually meet the mail. Now, the most important one is read your scope or the performance work statement very, very closely. Remember, we're going to have a scope, we're going to have a size, and a complexity, and we want to see certain projects that meet all three of them. And even if the actual evaluation factor says that you're allowed to submit, let's say 3 to 4 projects, make sure those 3 or 4 projects count. You would be so surprised that sometimes we have a basic contract that's large, it's like $240 million, $500 million, and people are submitting projects for $100K. Now, do you think we're going to look at that and think that you met the complexity? Probably not. Or let's say the scope says that we want you to show remediation services for groundwater, soil, sediment, soil vapor, radiation, munitions, and you submit a project for $100K for only soil. We're not going to look at that very favorably, and to be quite honest with you, your competition will probably have something better. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you make your proposal count, because if you don't have discussions, this may be your only chance to actually make a good impression. And the last thing is kind of what Ed was saying. The more information, the better. You would be so surprised when we said, do you have remediation experience in all of this media? And the proposal says, yes, we have excellent experience in remediation of all of these things, and look, we have an award to prove it. And then they show us all kinds of rewards and quotes from CPARs. That doesn't show us that you have the experience. And guess what? You're not going to be rated as high as someone else that will actually show, here's the reason why we're the best contractor for you that you need. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. Safety. Safety is, I'm not going to go through this too much because I think it's pretty straightforward. Bottom line is, have a good safety record. The best way to never get on a Navy base is have a poor safety record or have a very bad safety violation. We take safety extremely seriously. So I think the only thing I want to say on this slide is your technical narrative. If for some reason you have a minor mishap that may bump it up and your trend is up a little bit, and instead of going downwards, explain it. It could be very easy to explain away, but we don't know that unless you actually explain that into your narrative. But remember, this is a mandatory factor, and it should be easy to get past, but if you don't have a good safety record, you're not going to be evaluated favorably. Okay, next, please, for past performance. Past performance, this is a mandatory technical evaluation. Why? Because the Navy wants to make sure that we have the less risk for us when we're actually hiring a contractor. It makes sense. If you actually hire someone for your house, you want to do the same thing. You don't want someone just off the street that doesn't have a past history. So we will look at everything. Now, for folks who are doing other work with the Navy or government, we look at CPARs. That is going to be mandatory for us to look at. Why? Because it has to go through a system. Now, the number one thing I have to say about to the contractors on this line here is, if for some reason you have an evaluation that, let's say that you disagreed with the project manager, make sure in your CPARs you have an explanation for that. We read everything. We read everything. And there are some times that we look at it and we go, wow, okay, the contractor had a good explanation and they corrected everything that they did. Does that mean that the evaluation went up? That's completely up to the PM. So we read everything. CPARs are extremely important. Now, if you don't have a CPARs, we allow you to do a past performance questionnaire or PPQ. We don't like them as much because they're written by the contractor, but The main thing is we read those, we know they're written by the contractor, but what we'll always do is, at least what we try to always do, is we contact the client with the contact number that's on there. There are many times that I will call a client and they don't agree with what the contractor has written. Or they just say that it's not acceptable. So remember, don't just try to buffalo us with a good evaluation. The main thing is we will look at that and call a client if we need to.
Well, one more point, if I can, and this comes from the NAVFAC standards. We have to make past performance equal to all of the other non-price factors combined. Okay, so all the non-price factors combined equal past performance, and together, past performance and all the other non-price factors equal price. That's what we default to. So past performance, like I said earlier, is extremely important.
So it is important to, whenever you do your task order, and if a PM basically says, hey, you're going to have to up your game or we're going to give you a potential negative eval, take that very seriously. It's going to affect your future projects. One way that we actually evaluate past performance is we look at your successful completion tasks. We make sure that everything is being delivered on time, it's in good quality. Make sure that you get along with the teams. And also, the main thing is, too, with respect for stewardship of government funds, I think that's important. We want to make sure that we actually have a partner who is working with us and has the best intention for the government versus a contractor who may just think, hey, profit's my #1 thing. So that's another thing that we look at as well. All right, next, social economic programs. This is where, I'm not going to go too much into this either, but this is one that we normally use for as a evaluation factor, especially if it is unrestricted. But the main purpose for this is we're looking out for the small businesses, and you can see all of the social economic programs in there that we're looking for. Now, able to get rated higher on this is to actually add as much detail as possible of how you actually partner with each of these social economic programs. And that just doesn't mean, oh, we work with them or we will hire them, or, you know, we do actually look at what you do. So names, percentages, amounts you do is very good. And I'm telling you, the good contractors do a fantastic job at that, and it's easy to see. It's night and day of seeing the ones that actually work with the small businesses and who does not. All right, key personnel. Key personnel, this one doesn't often go into the basics, kind of what Ed was just basically saying. You know, just too many times that we had key personnel in there. It's kind of a check-off box, and then they get the award, and by the way, guess what? This guy just left the company, or we were going to switch this guy out, and whatever. So it's something that you have to have. We can ask for resumes at any time. And also, we were having problems with contractors actually putting up to win a bid or a basic. They're star performers, and they look fantastic, and then when the work was being done, all of a sudden they got switched out by folks who were not as good. So, and one other thing I kind of want to mention outside of key personnel, one thing I didn't put as a slide on here, are seed projects, because seed projects are often used as well as an evaluation factor. Now, those ones take more time to look at because they're more technical. That often will be used for basic contracts if it's a highly technical contract. However, remember, be careful with that, because if you may or may not have discussions. If you do have discussions, here's the biggest problem that I've seen. A lot of times, the second round, after discussions, they do worse. They have more errors in it than they did on the first round because of poor QC. And what I mean by that is they may have a weakness that was submitted. They correct that weakness in the text, but they don't correct it in the schedule. or you don't correct it into the costing. So now everything's all mixed up. It's hard to review. We don't know which area is valid or not. So make sure you are very, very careful of your consistency, especially if we have to redo something after a discussions. The last thing I would probably say too is that regardless of if you win or you lose on a contract, ask for a debrief. A lot of folks do not, and I think it's important for you to understand either what you did really good or what you did really bad. And we try to be as candid as possible to all of our offers to let them know, because we want you to do a better job of what you did. So with that, I think, so I was...
We won't bother with this one.
Yeah.
Push forward on that one.
Okay. I think that's it.
No. Okay, so real quick on the price, just a takeaway here is that we can and do pay premiums, all right? So we want you to sharpen your pencil, because that is definitely going to help. I just told you that price is equal to everything else combined. But we're willing to justify going to a higher price offer if it's worth it, which goes right into that. How explicit are you in conveying to us how great you are, how do you differentiate yourself, and that you're the best choice for us. That's basically it. So maybe we overran our time, so we're going to toss the ball back, I think.
All right, Eric, you have the ball now.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. This is Eric Spellman back with Red Team again. I'm going to go spend a few minutes going through proposal development strategies. And since you all heard a lot of details from the evaluator side, I'm really going to probably sound more like a English professor or someone who used to tell you how to write and things like that, some of my tips. But the slides have some more details as well. But for sake of time, I'm going to cover some broad points, much like Jeff did. What is a winning proposal? I mean, a winning proposal is, first of all, you have to take all the capture materials, all the things that Jeff talked about earlier into consideration. Make sure you keep those. Make sure you use those to generate your proposal. Those are win themes, all the strategies you made. Make sure you don't just put them aside and start over again with the proposal. There's got to be a good handoff between the capture team and the proposal team. So that is probably the single best way to get your proposal off and started well. The second bullet talks about special or unique to your company. Yes, definitely you can bring those up. However, we've seen cases where people have submitted and brought up a unique feature that they thought was going to help sell and ended up hurting them. We've got a couple examples where someone talked about greening of the workforce, and when there was a particular clause in the Section H that's basically prohibited people from being changed over, it sounded like a win theme, it sounded like a good thing in theory, but in reality, it ended up hurting the company, and it was not really an evaluation criteria. So I would say, yes, you want to feature special or unique things, but make sure they're the right ones, make sure they don't get you out of compliance, and make sure you really think them through before putting them in there, especially if they're not necessarily being evaluated. Make sure they're going to help you, not hurt you. Anticipating competitor win themes, I think really we're talking about how people call it ghosting or that type of thing, where you kind of sort of want to stand out from your known competition. Again, going back to your capture, the 2 to 3 main competitors that you believe are most likely going to be in the running with you. Make sure you differentiate yourself specifically from them. If you know things through your competitive analysis that they're weak on, make sure you get them in the proposal as your strength. So, not only just that they're weak, but make sure you're strong in those areas as well. And I think all that goes to being the lowest risk proposal. The tools. We use a couple of tools here at Red Team, and everybody has these tools and different versions of them. I've seen a lot of different versions at different companies, and being a consultant and going out to 20 or 30 different companies, everybody had different tools, spreadsheets, track packs, all these types of things. They called them all different things, but they all came down to these basic 4 bullets that you see on the top as a compliance schedule, who's doing what, and then the proposal progress to make sure you're staying on schedule and make sure that the proposal is progressing as you've got it in the schedule. So when you're doing pink team, you're not really, you really are at pink team. You're not delayed. Or when you're at red team, you really have a red team document. You're not behind. The thing we use right up front, and I think that one of the most important things to do is really to slow down to speed up. Really, what you need to do in the beginning is go through your RFP in detail, put together an annotated outline. Our annotated outlines that we use, you break down the RFP into the section L, section M, the scope, any other sections, H, wherever there are other requirements that are in the proposal. We break that down, we put the language from the RFP in there, and then we also take guidance and other tips and notes and even some templates. We'll put a table or a figure, or we'll put something in there to placehold to say this is how we should address it. Again, the important thing is to not try to go too fast and just start writing. It's just to really get your plan together, get all your capture, again, go back to your capture documents, make sure when you get them in the right places in the proposal where they're supposed to go so that they actually translate into your proposal. All that work you did up front actually gets in the proposal. That's very important. Compliance matrix, again, just trying to make sure you need to be compliant, follow the instructions like friends at NAVFAC said. Next, here we go. The outline. This is what I talked about a little bit briefly, but you can see a little a picture of this outline. We color code. There's different ways to do it, but the bottom line is you get all your information into one document. You get all the instructions, all the guidance, all your information. You give that to your writers. You give that to your people that are developing sections so that they know what to do up front and they're not guessing. And again, you have different writers, so different people are going to approach it different ways, but you give them as much information up front to get them down the right path. There's nothing worse than having a writer go down the wrong path and then having to redo it. The sequential writing process, this gets back to what I was saying, is to spend more time up front. Those of you who are in the 80s in the Navy, dimming and total quality management, all these things that they talked about, one of the big takeaways from that is spend your time up front. Don't schedule your pink team. Don't rush your first draft. Get your pink. Give your team plenty of time to get to pink team. Don't try to do it in 3 or 4 days, and then you have a horrible pink team, and then you're again behind. You say you're going to red, but you're not really at red. You weren't at pink, and you're not at red. So be realistic. Take your time up front. Your solutioning, all those types of things. Your bullets. Go to bullets. Don't just start writing. Get stuff in there and laid in correctly. And again, I just say go slow to speed up, and that's what happens. The other thing is some general writing tips. Again, they mentioned that the evaluators, it's a part-time job. Let's get them back to help them get back to their full-time job. These tables, put plenty of white space in, short sentences. We're engineers, but yes, we don't want to write like engineers in here. And worse, we don't want to write like lawyers, and I'll apologize to any lawyer that may be on the line. But you don't want sentences that are a paragraph long. You just don't want to do that to people. And if you can do it in tables, figures, different ways to say it, whereas you're not reading a ton of prose, that's even better. I would say finally on the writing tips is if you can do it in fewer pages, just because you have a 50-page count, if you can do it in 40 pages, do it in 40 pages. Don't make them go to the extra 10 pages. If you've got it all addressed, you've woven anything in there that you want, and you're at 40 or 45 pages, don't put another 5 pages in and try to extend it or BS it or whatever. It's more pages, and you're not adding to your proposal. You're just making them read more pages. So, oops, I keep hitting the wrong. Here we go. Writing techniques. This is a little bit what I've been talking about. You can read these bullets, but I was given more of the broader pieces. I mean, it goes back to what your English teachers told you. Write positive, write things that you're going to do. Be clear. And and be direct. Use first person. Be very direct and don't use passive voice. And say exactly what you're going to do. I won't read this slide. It's kind of a funny slide. I'll let people read it afterwards. But if you're an incumbent, there is a tendency to be a little lax sometimes. And I think again, what I would recommend is it's not really the proposal so much as make sure you're going back through the capture process again. Act like you're not the incumbent in some ways, and go back to your capture, go talk to your client that you're currently working with, make sure you understand and they've communicated everything you're doing right, wrong, and different. You know, don't just assume you're doing everything right, even if they've said you're doing things right. I would say go back and just check that. And again, when you get to the proposal, I think the best thing you can do is just write your proposal as if you're not the incumbent and take it that way, and you'll hopefully avoid this problem. Here are some basic tips as well. We're looking at proposals for bad. This is really a mix of capture and proposal, but you know, you don't want to ignore the draft solicitations. If you get the draft out, you can comment on it. They're asking for comments. Make sure you review it, comment on it. That's part of shaping it as well towards the end. You know, make sure you see that and make sure that you're still going to be strong, that the requirements in the draft are things that you can meet. The rest of these are pretty obvious. Just, you know, make sure you demonstrate your understanding. I think Melanie said, don't just say, yes, we understand, or, you know, we've done this. You got to prove it. You got to say it, and you got to prove it. And then here the good side. Suggesting additional evaluation criteria. You can always suggest evaluation criteria. For example, I think Jeff mentioned about the prime contracts counting. You can always say, hey, will you count subcontractor work if it's same scope, same type of thing? Just because we were a sub, you know, would you be able to evaluate that equally? It doesn't hurt to ask the question. It doesn't hurt to do that even while you're doing your proposal, because there's still questions open while you're doing your proposal. Sections L and M. I think sometimes sections L and M don't always agree, but you got to do your best to organize it in the way they're structured. So go in the order of L. You got to, and then if M is not necessarily 100% consistent with how L is structured, you've got to figure a way to make a decision whether you're going to follow L primarily and then weave M in as a secondary, or how you're going to mix those two and how you're going to cross them. There's no right answer in it. It really depends on, you know, how each of them read. Sometimes you could say M is be the major criteria, but then if you follow M as your major headings, sometimes you can be viewed as not compliant with the instructions in L. So it is a bit of a challenge. I think that's the most important thing, is to really look at those two sections and really make sure they're setting it up so that it is easy to determine that you're compliant with L, and it's easy for the evaluators to find where you're talking to the evaluation criteria. I guess lastly, yeah, don't disagree with any terms. If you're having to alter terms and disagree with all these terms, you probably haven't done your capture, you probably haven't not working your proposal, and you probably shouldn't be bidding. That's the end of mine. I hope I caught us up a little bit, and we're good to go. So I guess we'll open it. I'll throw it back to Tim and for questions or the next steps.
All right, Eric. Thank you very much for that great presentation, and thanks to all of our panelists. We do have several questions from the audience here, so we'll go ahead and get started. To all panelists, what are your thoughts of presenting a slate of projects versus a slate of programs when the acquisition is for an IDIQ?
This is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask what that meant. We were kind of spurring our brow. Not sure what you mean by programs as opposed to projects. So if the other panelists may have a better idea, but I'll just tell you that we use rock-solid projects to reflect how well your experience, you're related to the experience plus your past performance. And in some cases, we actually include as one of your submissions an IQ contract itself. That shows that you can handle concurrent projects and so forth. So we sometimes include those. I think we're including it in the MARAC, but that's my point. I don't understand what they mean by programs, so I'll kick it over back to the other panelists if they know.
Yeah, this is Eric and Jeff. I think I was questioning the same thing with the furrowed brow. I think if you're saying if program is meant by basically a group of projects, a group of like projects, whether it's, I would assume it's on one contract versus just individual projects. The solicitations usually tell you which they'll allow and which they won't allow. They either say it can count as a project or it can't. And so, I mean, from a compliance standpoint, that's what you have to look at. I'm not sure if there's a follow-on to that. Maybe we didn't address it so much, but it was a follow-on question.
Eric, this is Tim. We do have a clarification from it says program is an IDIQ versus showing task orders, if that helps.
Right, okay, and I would just go back to, I've seen either allowed. Sometimes to say you can count an IDIQ, you just have to list all the task orders, and some say you have to, use an individual project on that IDIQ, and IDIQ doesn't count as a contract. So it's usually one way or the other. I don't know from NAVFAC's perspective if you allow both, which do you view more strongly, NAVFAC, if you can do both?
Yeah, so we actually rely on the projects almost always, but again, like I mentioned, and this is based on actually feedback from our previous industry day, we do include IQs for various reasons. So to Leslie and anybody else that may have thought about that, what I would suggest is for whatever other agency you're dealing with, is feel free to go ahead and float the idea, but give them some rationale for it as well. So if they're going for a large contract or they're putting in place another multiple award or a single award IQ contract, tell them the benefits to us, the agency, as to why including an IQ would make sense. And further, I would also recommend telling them how to evaluate it as well. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're very clear in what we're going to get and why we're adding all this extra information to review during the evaluation. So if you answer that and you can present it, then I think other agencies, and even including ourselves, would consider including more often.
All right, thank you. Next question. This would be for Melanie. What kinds of things are you looking at to streamline or optimize the acquisition process?
Okay, so what we're doing, and this is for NAVFAC nationwide, so NAVFAC mostly it's going from headquarters, Lance, and PAC, and then Southwest is helping as well. So we're first of all looking to see where the programmatic areas are internally, and majority of it is, and you guys can probably understand this, is garbage in equals garbage out. Otherwise saying, if we have a very a poorly written scope, or something that's given out to you to bid on and it's just too vague, or you don't even know where it's going from, or incorrect, it just causes more time and pain and RFIs. So the main thing, that's one thing that we're trying to do is actually provide templates for everyone to use to minimize the poorly written type of document. So that's kind of, that was just kind of one example would be scopes, but altogether it's going to be a lot of the report writing that we have to do. Now, Ed kind of talked about how many reports we have to write. If we make it more consistent with templates, it makes it a lot easier to do, and it's faster.
Also, to that point, I just showed you the POAMs. I told you that there's about 80 separate tasks to do a large contract. And while we can't necessarily get rid of some of them, we can at least identify firm target dates to hit those tasks. And so we're kind of reinvigorating, and this is at the NAVFAC level, both on the capital improvements as well as environmental business lines are both doing simultaneously developing standardized POAMs that we use as a baseline, and so that we're trying to make sure that we can accurately project a should-take award date, and then from there we try and force the team, and I know I do it on our team here, to try and stick to those POAMs. So that's another initiative that we're putting in place.
Industry is another one too. We're actually getting more feedback from the industry so we can actually make better, improved, and more efficient scopes and the way that you guys see things.
All right, very good, thank you. We have another question actually related to Industry Day. Someone who attended your MARAC Industry Day yesterday, complimenting you on the format, and just saying how can we influence other business lines with NAVFAC Southwest to use this method?
I'm doing that with my counterparts in capital improvements and public works as well. So I think the proof is in the pudding in a sense, that whenever I have an opportunity to share the success of this, I think that they realize that, a little effort on the front end to prepare, to send out the special notices with our draft RFPs, draft evaluation factors, because that is some effort, right? And so, but if we do that and set up the logistics of holding these things, it'll pay off in spades on the back end with less RFIs, better understanding of the criteria, and better understanding of the scope.
All right, very good, thank you. Another question regarding specificity of debriefs. How can we get a decent debriefing from agencies that refuse to be specific?
So this, and the quote here too is what they apparently heard was, "You were good, but the winner was better." That's unfortunate. Hopefully that wasn't from our agency, but there's a requirement that we tell you, kind of exactly why you didn't get the job, and that's basically it. So the level of specificity, can differ depending on your viewpoint, I suppose. So I don't know the details of this, but if that's all they told you, then they've done you a disservice, and I would suggest that you circle back with the contracting officer and just ask kind of why, why you, or just explain why you felt it didn't go into as much detail to be able to help us going forward with future proposals. I want to take an opportunity to kind of challenge the industry, our contractor partners here. There is a requirement for us to do debriefs over a threshold, and so we will do them, particularly if you ask in a timely fashion. That debrief can last up to 5 minutes. Okay, we'll tell you where you failed. We'll give you those details, but then that can be the end of the debrief. What I would suggest is when you request a debrief, and what I actually used to do in the past, just on my own volition, is I'll have you come in. I'll say your debrief's going to last about 5 minutes. You're going to ask some questions, and then we'll both agree that the debrief is over, but we'll spend the remainder of our 30 minutes to talk about your proposal and ideas on how you can improve, okay? Because I think each board is different, each agency is different, and while we won't go back over the details that we covered in the debrief, at least you'll have an opportunity to have your proposal writer or whoever in there to understand, just how much they can improve upon the presentation of their material. So I would suggest when you go in and you ask for a debrief, that you politely request that after the debrief is officially over, that you can take the time to just kind of point out some of the things that you can improve on in your presentation.
Thank you. Another question here. I noticed many firms fill their SF330 templates with firm branding. Is this necessary? I think it's better to leave forms alone and not add branding. What do you think?
Well, we agree with you. Sometimes, colors or highlights or something fancy can draw attention to maybe some past experience or cover experience that other firms don't have, and I think in that case it's useful. But in general, the more colors, more branding, everything else just kind of distracts from what's in the proposal.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other comments, sir?
No.
For a NAVFAC, is the technical team the same for non-price and price evaluations?
Yes. Yes, it's one source selection board. You'll know that different types of agencies, like if it was say a different SysCom, they may have a separate or like say base operating services. You'll have separate technical evaluation teams that fall under another team, and then you'll have a price evaluation team and others. But for what we do in the environmental core here at NAVFAC Southwest, it's one source selection board. Go ahead.
And I was going to say that we also now have a cost analyst on board too, who helps out with pricing.
Right. So it is one board. The technical people stay on that. So when I was talking earlier about they do a technical evaluation first, when their report's done, then we open up price, and then we do a trade-off analysis, and it's the same people. That answers the question.
All right, thank you. Next question. Is a project inside the AOR performed for a non-NAVFAC client preferable to a project outside the AOR performed for NAVFAC, assuming similar scope and complexity?
So we have to go by what the evaluation criteria states. So if we don't state what it is, then we're going to probably treat them the same, right? So if we make the differentiation, then we'll obviously evaluate accordingly. To this point, what I would suggest is if you have the opportunity to submit RFIs or pre-solicitation at an industry day or at any opportunity up front, is to go ahead and ask the question and to make it clear in the RFP what matters most to us.
And I want to add to that too. So I think it also depends on the scope and what exactly the Navy is asking for a service. For instance, so we live in California. California actually has often more strict regulations and rules than other states, and so therefore, I'll just take radiological for instance. Our radiological in California is a lot more strict than other states. So if a contractor shows that they have had regulator experience where they've gotten free release status or, you know, a success in California where I know it's harder to do versus in other states, that may mean more to us. So it all depends on, like what Ed said, what the scope actually says.
All right, thank you very much. Next question regarding experience. For young companies that lack past performances, project size, and so forth, but still feel confident with their capabilities, what advice do you have?
I will let the other panelists answer that one.
Yeah, this is a red team here. I would recommend you probably get a team with somebody, a team with a company that has it that can help you mitigate that deficiency. You could JV, you can do a CTA, and again, it depends. You could do prime sub. It just depends on, you know, what projects are counted. If subcontractor team member projects aren't counted, then that won't work. So you have to do a JV. So you got to get to you find out what those criteria are early, and then set up your team appropriately so that you can overcome that weakness. Do you have anything to add? Okay.
Good advice. Thank you very much. Next question for NAVFAC. How much weight do you put on major sub-consultants when making a selection?
So sub-consultants meaning subcontractors, I'm assuming?
I would assume so.
Okay. So we'll specify, and if we don't, and if it's unclear in a RFP, ask the question. But we found that, you know, ponying up a great subcontractor doesn't necessarily pan out over the 5 years. So we've avoided including major subs. So we focus on the prime. And the prime can be a joint venture. So if you want to, if you're serious for the work, go to the effort of getting that legal entity made with that other partner, and go forth that way, because we're just going to focus on the prime, not with somebody who you say you might, and regardless of even letters of intent, they're not as strong as a JV binding agreement.
Okay, good. Thank you. We've still got a few more questions here. We're coming up on the 2:30 mark here, but we'll probably go just a few minutes over if you get all the questions. We have a CCAS primarily evaluates the general contractor. What is the benefit to NAVFAC to have designers submit a CCAS instead of a PPQ on a DB project. The PPQ would provide much more information on the performance of the designer.
Well, this is a construction side. We're talking design build with the designer or A&E involved. Unfortunately, I can't really talk to the details of that side of it, but feel free to shoot the host a note, and we'll try and run that to ground and get it back to the SAME folks. But I think just in general, we want to hear from the client directly. Right? So you can have somebody that writes very well and gins up these PPQs, and as Melanie said, our recourse is to simply go back and validate with the client if we can get a hold of them. So we'd much prefer to use, direct from the horse's mouth their feedback. And also in the CPARs, there's an opportunity for the contractor to comment as well. So we see that there, and so so that's what we tend to do. So that's by default, yeah.
And I just want to add on to that too. So going through several proposals, what we have basically seen is that several of the PPQs, it's very apparent that the contractor has written the PPQ, sent it to an RPM, and the RPM just signs it off. And you could just tell with so many different things of when that happens. So, and a lot of times the PPQ almost mirrors the proposal. But so overall, that's one reason also, like exactly what Ed just said. We want to hear it from the client. We want to make sure it's from the client.
And Melanie, yeah, this is the red team folks. Question for you. Maybe I'm not allowed to ask questions, but to follow up with that, you guys, are you all allowing PPQs to be reused? Because I know there was an issue for a while where you keep bugging. We kept having to bug our same clients over and over and over and we'd already had PPQs that were submitted on another proposal. Do you all accept those and view those the same way?
I'm not quite understanding the question. I guess if you're saying it's a PPQ for the same project?
Yeah, same project, but it was filled out for a different proposal for another NAVFAC, but we want to reuse the PPQ instead of getting a new one and bugging the client again, I guess is what we're saying.
Yeah, so if, okay, so the client needs to obviously be aware that you're going to be using it again, right? So to expect a phone call. But no, we don't care. Whatever you submit as part of your proposal is your submission. And so if it's tailored towards a different contract and not quite tailored to the other contract, that could be an issue. So you want to make sure you've got some QA on the input or the discussion of that past performance as it relates to that contract. So I would just caution you there, but there's nothing that says that you have to do a whole new one. No.
As long as it's done within about the same time period. I mean, if it's been a year, 2 years, it may not be accurate anymore.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Next question regarding CPARs. When they are downloaded, when are they downloaded from PPIRS? If there is a CPAR in review at the time of download, can the contractor request that the final CPAR be reevaluated during discussions or best and final?
Well, if it's part of an element of the discussion, then we may. But we typically, otherwise, it's just this ongoing, endless, need to review, and so we're not going to do that to ourselves. So, if there's a question that results in, if it's a discussion question that will include an evaluation notice, then it depends on the question, but we may go back in and look at past performance relative to that issue at hand. Otherwise, we're going to pull them down, we're going to do the evaluation, we're going to write the reports, and then move forward. So unless there's something that's particular in the discussion that relates to that particular type of past performance issue, then no, we won't.
Okay. All right, right up at 2:30, I'm just going to go with a couple more questions here. We'll wrap up. to anyone on the panel, where can folks find out about upcoming NAVFAC RFPs?
Well, you can drive down to our office here and go to the plant issue room. Okay, so maybe I'm off by about 20 years here, but no, obviously our public website has easy to find links. I don't know if we have that handy to tell you off the phone, but you know, with all the search engines now, it shouldn't be that hard. We have our operations department here has required of all of the business lines to update them with our upcoming procurements and also when to expect award of some of our procurements, including the 8 contracts that we have in process here with environmental.
If you go to navfac.navy.mil, and then you would just have to search for procurement.
Right, and so please let the host know if there's any difficulty in finding it, but everything should be on the website. And SAME, we partner with industry in seminars and other things, you know, where we have business line representatives that go to those that will provide those updates as well. And also at a lot of, for the San Diego Post, we have luncheons, and I know that for OC they have luncheons too, and we often will have quarterly luncheons where we have just the environmental team actually go up there, and the very last slide will actually show you which procurements will be coming up.
Great, thank you. For Allison, are there any repercussions to firms who file protests during the procurement process?
No, we can't actually take any that into consideration because it's not an evaluation factor, but it definitely does frustrate the government when there are protests filed, especially when we put all this work into it, because it does just delay the contract awards. And then for our project managers, it really does limit what contracting options we have.
So I'll piggyback a little onto that. Obviously, you have human beings in there. Again, it's a collateral duty. If things go south, it's either on our fault or you know, there's a reason why we got to that point. Just know that you know, the contract specialist, myself, and our attorneys will ensure that there won't be any emotion or anything like that that's involved in the evaluation or in the write-ups at all. So we believe we're very good at it, but as Allison said, you know, I think she just felt it needed to be said that it does throw a huge monkey wrench in there, and there's no possible way we can, what is it, the word retaliate or something? We can't. There's no way we're going to do that. That would be way too much exposure legally on that. So no, that won't happen. But we are human beings, so just make sure that if it's something that you feel is completely wrong, and we're not giving you the right answer, or we're not engaging to the point you feel, then obviously it's your right to do so. But that's kind of what we will have to say on that one.
Okay, thank you, Ed. I think we have one more question here, and then we'll call it. Why can't there be more transparency in the acquisition process, like posting which milestone is next in anticipated completion?
That's a good question. I would say that, you know, again, back to those slides where I showed all the POAM steps, you know, the POAM can go off kilter exponentially as you're going through the process, and it can start from the number of submissions you get. As possible, environmental, we typically get, you know, anywhere from, you know, 6 to, you know, 16 offers. In capital improvements, you get upwards of 50 for these projects. So, and so you have a different type of process. CI probably will do a 2-phase. We typically can handle by going 1 phase. And so, as things happen, as the proposals roll out, we can see whether our scope was tight or was loose by how well the proposals reflect what we're asking for, or what we think we're asking for. And so each step along the way can have an impact. And you know, the larger the dollar value. So you'll see capacity amounts that are usually 30 million, 50 million, 100 million, or 250, or slightly under that. And that's because there's peer reviews and other threshold events that, you know, approval levels that impact. So each date would slide, so it wouldn't make sense and we just simply don't have the resources to be able to update something that would be visible to all. And then you start to get into source selection sensitive issues when we go into discussions. So everything from the number of offers we get, who, of course, certainly any of their information in the proposals, including price, any of that kind of stuff that may impact, you know, our process, including discussions, is source selection sensitive. So we don't want to walk that fine line. So unfortunately, we have to keep it behind the curtain, but at least you know the process that we have to go through.
Okay, very good. I was less than truthful. We have one last question that came in, and then I'm definitely calling it. If the RFP asks us for a max of 5 projects to demonstrate our experience on projects of similar size, scope, and complexity, and we only have 3 projects to really answer, do we get downgraded for providing just 3 projects?
Well, it depends. If the factor says up to 5 rather than a minimum of 5, you know, that's one thing. So you have to be responsive. So if it says a minimum of 5 projects and you only have 3, then you know, don't bid on it. If it's up to 5, then no, not necessarily. I think the competitive advantage you lose is that those that have 5 or more than 5 that they can use may be able to cover the scope of work more broadly by you know, choosing those particular projects. If you only have 3, you only have 3, and yeah, I mean, you're not going to get downgraded. You may not get as much as perhaps, say, your competitor, because you may not be able to cover as much. So it's not a downgrade per se. You just may not you may not have as many strengths, you know, at the end of the day, as opposed to some of the other competitors.
Right, so just the opposite. So the other contractors who have provided 5, who have more experience, will more than likely be evaluated with higher, just because you're right, they may have more strength.
Right, and this is Eric, and I would go back to my comment about I wouldn't put, if the 2 projects, I wouldn't just try to put 2 projects in there even if they don't fit, because I think, again, you're making the reviewers review things that really aren't helping your case. So if it is up to 5, do your best 3, and that's what you got.
All right, thank you.
I agree with that, actually. Yep.
Good. Excellent feedback from everyone. All right, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and call an end to our Q&A. I'd like to extend a warm thank you to our presenters from NAVFAC and Red Team, as well as to all of our attendees. As a reminder, following the webinar, the presentations will be emailed to all attendees within 3 business days. Please watch out for a follow-up email, which will contain the presentation, your PDH certificate, and a link to the recording of this webinar. On behalf of the Society of American Military Engineers and the Environmental Committee, we appreciate everyone's participation and hope that the webinar has been useful.